Okay, let's begin. This week's parsha in Parsha Shlach, we have the story where the Meraglim are told, go to Eretz Yisrael. They come back, they give the negative report that they give, and as a result, Hashem says that the Jewish people are not going to enter into Eretz Yisrael. Let's read the psukim that the Eibishter says in the Parsha. Kichol ha'anoshim haroim es kvoidi. All of the people who saw my glory, meaning they experienced the Nisim and they experienced Matan Torah, that's Oisoisai, Asher Asisi v'Mitzrayim u'v'Amidbar. They've seen the signs, the miracles that I did in Mitzrayim and in the Midbar, and yet, despite the fact that they saw so much about God and Elikus, Vayinasu Oisi Zeh Eser Pa'amim, they tested me, they rebelled 10 separate times, and the Gemara enumerates what the 10 different instances and where the Yidden were rebelling against Hashem in the Midbar. The final time and the 10th time was the story of the Meraglim, and they didn't listen to me. So God is swearing in Yiru es Haaretz Asher Nishbati that will they, meaning they won't, see the land that I promised La'avoisam, the Chomenatzai, and all the people who fought against me, Lo Yiruha, will not see the land of Eretz Yisrael. Continues, V'tapchem Asher Amartan Lavaz, and the children who the spies said, if we go to Eretz Yisrael, we're going to lose the war, then the children will be the loot. The children will be the loot of war. So, to the contrary, I will bring them to the land, V'yadu, as ha'aretz asher ma'astem ba, they will know the land that you held in and regarded negatively. Ufigreichem atem, and your bodies, yiplu ba'midbar hazeh, you will die out in this midbar. Now, we have a medrash that describes what was the nature of the dying out that happened to this generation. This generation, all the people who were old, who were experienced, who were adults at this time, passed away over the next 40 or 38 years. So the medrash describes how this happened. Amar Reb Levi, now we're going to look in together. This is for Monty. Amar Reb Levi, Kol Eretz Tisha B'Av, Haya Moshe Moitzi Kruz B'Chol HaMachane V'Omer. They chose the day of Tisha B'Av. Remember, the Tisha B'Av is the day that the Meraglim... That's good. The Tisha B'Av is the day that the Meraglim, they cried that whole night. That was the day that Meraglim came back and gave their negative report. So on that anniversary, every year, Moshe would give an announcement to Lachbar, everyone go and dig. They would go out of their tents. They would dig graves. They would sleep inside what I guess is an open grave. The Shachris, in the morning, Moshe would make an announcement and say, Kumu come and let's separate the dead from those who are living, meaning whoever is dead, I guess they were buried right there in that spot, and those who were alive climbed out of their graves and had another chance at life. Then they would, get out of the graves, and they would find that there were 15,000 short. The Preutrot means plus a little sum, and that was minus the 600,000. So what's happening over here? You have 600,000 male Jewish adults that need to die out in the Midbar. So if you do the math, this happens in the second year. So, and there were 40 years in the Midbar, so there's 38 years. So if you do the math, and you do 16,000 times 38, it comes out to more than 600,000. If you do 15,000 times 38, it comes out less than 600,000. So it was somewhere in between. There was somewhere in between 15,000 and 16,000 that every year died out. Times 38, you end up with the whole 600,000 male population dying out over a period of 38 years. So that's what it's saying here. They found that those Chamisha Asar Elef Beprutrut means and an odd sum. So, and a little as well. Probably some a foreign word, probably Latin or Greek or something like that. That was the number. In the last year, the 40th year in the desert, they did the same protocol. And no one died. They all woke up. And they all woke up the next morning. Amru, so they said, maybe it's the wrong day. Maybe we made a mistake. Maybe it's not Tes Ba'av. Maybe it's a different day. So they did the same thing the next day, the 10th. On the 11th. On the 12th. Each one of these days. But when they saw the full moon on Tes Vav Ba'av, Chamisha Asar Ba'av, Amru, they said, it seems like HaKadosh Baruch Hu is done. This Gzera is finished. All those who have to die out had died out, because by now it's the 15th of the month, clear evidence. You know, the 9th and the 10th, you can get messed up. You look in the sky, you're not really sure if you understand what's going on. But the 15th full moon, you can't mistake that. And so you definitely knew it wasn't Tisha B'Av. And Chazru Asru Yom Tov. And so in this way, Chamisha Asar B'Av becomes a Yom Tov. This is, the Gemara talks about different things that happen on Chamisha Asar B'Av, different positive things. This is one of the positive things that happens on that day. Okay, now, what we are going to talk about is today's shir is about a fascinating Gemara that talks about these people who passed away in the Midbar, how Rabba Bar Chana encounters them. So, a word about Rabba Bar Chana, as we're going to see later. Rabba, his name was Rav Abba. His name was Abba. Many Jews at the time had the name Abba. But to be called Rav Abba, it's like if you slur your word and you just turn it into one word, it turns into Rabba. So Rabba is an abbreviation for Rav Abba. And his father's name was, I guess, Bar Chana. His father's name was Bar Chana, so he becomes Rabba Bar Chana. The Gemara in Baba Basra, in the chapter that begins with Hamoicheres Asfina, has a good few blot of fabulous, fascinating, bizarre, intriguing, miraculous stories all around the individual of Rabba Bar Chana. And much has been said about, and this whole topic in itself, of how much of these types of Gemaras in the Agadata section are literal, non-literal, and that's a subject that we've touched on in the past shiurim. We're not going to go there today. One of the fantastic stories that is present there is how he goes on this trip and he encounters these Meisei Midbar, those who passed away, the 15,000 each year over the course of 38 years, and he encounters them. And it's a very bizarre story. And the Rebbe, in 1936, wrote in his Rishimis, in his personal diary, wrote an interpretation of the story that he never said later at a Sikha, at a Fabrengen. So it only became known after Gimel Tammuz, when in Tavshin Vav in 1996, in the summer, around Parsha Shlach, when they published that piece of the diary, and as we'll get to that soon. So first, let's read the Gemara. Amar Rabba Bar Chana, says Rabba Bar Chana, Zimna Chada, one time, Hava Ka'azlinam B'Midbara, we were traveling in the desert. The Islave, and we were joined by Hahutaya, by a certain Arab traveler.
Wait a minute, he's more than one person. Who was going with him?
Not clear.
Okay.
Omar Li, so the Taya, the Arab guy, tells me, Ta achvelach meisei midbar, let me show you the dead of the midbar. So meaning the Arab tour guide here knows the location in the desert where the meisei midbar are buried. Uzli, so we went, Chazisinu, and we saw them. That's interesting, they weren't covered, they weren't buried, so apparently not. Apparently they're out in the open. Yes, so Rabba Bar Chana is living in Babylonia. So that's quite a distance to go to the desert. What was that?
In the desert, is it even possible
for what?
For bodies to remain intact?
Physically, no. That's I don't think so.
Into those, desert.
We're talking about.
Okay. Again, this really gets into there are a lot of fantastic stories there. Again, it gets into that broader conversation of literal and metaphor, and there are different traditions on how to understand these things. I think most people, even in the Ashkenazi tradition, which were more inclined to go with the literal, even here, I think we're more inclined to go with the non-literal. Okay. We saw them, vidamu, and they looked like keman de mivsimi, like chayev inish lipsume bepiria. Mivsimi means intoxicated, inebriated, drunk. They looked like they were inebriated. Veganu apirkid, and they were lying on their backs. Vahava zakifu berche dechadminayo, and one of their knees was erect. So imagine this is the leg, so it looks like that. Instead of lying flat, it's like this. Va'ayil taya tute birke, and so the Arab traveler was able to go under the knee. Ki rachiv gamla, while he was riding his camel. V'uskifa rumche, and his spear was erect. V'loi nagabe, and it still didn't touch the thing. So really, he's a huge body. He is so tall that the Arab on a donkey with an erect spear is able to go under, and he doesn't hit him. Paske chada karna, so I cut off one corner, the tchilta of the tchelas, we'll just understand that to mean the corner of the tzitzis, Dechad minayu, of one of the dead of the midbar. V'loi have a mistagelon, but then we weren't able to move. I wasn't able to travel. I became stuck. Amarli, so the Arab asked me, Dilma shakalta midi minayu, maybe you took something from them. Ahadre, if you did give it back, the Gmiri, for we have a tradition, the man de shokol midi minayu. Anyone who takes something from them, loy mistage le, meaning won't be able to move. Meaning other people have tried this in the past. They come, they're like, hey, let's raid these bodies, and whoever does it is not able to move. Ozela darte, so I went and I returned what I took, v'hader mistagelon, and then we were able to move. When I came to the rabbis, Amruli, they said, call Abba Chamra. Every Abba, remember his name, Rabba is Abba. Call Abba Chamra. Every Abba is a donkey, meaning you're as dumb as a donkey. The whole Bar Barchana, and every Bar Barchana is a sichsa, is another word for a shaita. So they basically cursed him out in very harsh terms, saying that he was unwise. Why? Lamai hilchasa avadatachi. For what halachic purpose did you cut off the corner of the tzitzis? Obviously, lemeda, you wanted to know, ike Beis Shammai, ike Beis Hillel. You wanted to know if the tzitzis were done in accordance with Beis Shammai or Beis Hillel. This is like using archaeology in order to prove what the right halacha is. And this comes up in multiple, like if you find old tefillin, you could try to see, you have Rashi or Rabbeinu Tam. This was like done, right? Old tefillin, the reality is that both were found. So here also, like you're trying to prove the machlekes. What's the machlekes? There's a machlekes. Our tzitzis is 4 strings that are folded over and fall into 8. The truth is that's Beis Shammai's opinion. Beis Hillel said it's 3 strings that fall over to 6, that turn into 6. And so that's one debate. Another debate is how long does the string need to be once you're finished with your knots and your cholias? How much string do you need to have here? And there's a debate between 3 fingers and 4 fingers. And Beis Shammai says you need to have 3 fingers, and Beis Hillel says you need to have 4 fingers. And so, why did you cut it? Obviously, you wanted to figure out what's the right way. So if so, why don't you just count the strings and count the chulias in order to be able to tell which was right, which you didn't do, and so therefore you're not a wise person. One of the things the Mefarshim address over here is what's with the harsh language toward a fellow rabbi, but the truth is it's not the only time in the Gemara. You have many other examples of a harsh statement that's said to another one of the Amoraim when someone didn't like what he said. And so really, if you want to understand that, you have to look at all those statements together and address them in a broader way, which we're not going to do right now.
Just go to February.
What was that?
Or just go to
Okay, but that's not recorded in writing, though. Okay, fine. Now, as I said before, the Rebbe's Rishim on this, we didn't have until Tafshin and Vav. But what we did have is that in Tafshin Lamed Beis, the Rebbe printed stuff from his father. Basically, when Rebbe Tzachana came out of Russia, she brought with him stuff from the Rebbe Levi Yitzchak, and I think stuff came out after. In Tafshin Lamed Beis, the Rebbe published Likutei Levi Yitzchak that had the writings of the Rebbe's fathers. Tafshin Lamed Aleph and Lamed Beis. Over the course of 2 years, the Rebbe published stuff from his father.
Like the Russians probably got them out?
Yes, some of the stuff. And in one of the volumes, I believe the last volume, you have a few letters. And the Rebbe writes in the Pesach Dover that these are letters that I was zeicha. The Rebbe writes that I was zeicha to get from my father between the years 1929 and 1939 or something like that, and I'm publishing them here. So one of the letters, which comes from Baruch Hashem Gimel Shmois, the winter of Hey Alofim Tov Reish Sadik Vav, just in an order that's different. So that's 1936, or the end of 35, beginning of 1936. The Rebbe's father was in the Nepa Petraf, and the letter begins, at least in the printed version, Va'ircha berashi prakim. I will give you ha'aris in general terms, bidvar ha'maimer de Rabba Bar Chana, about the passage of Rabba Bar Chana Bahataya, about this Arab traveler, Imam Eisei Midbar, Dibarta Oidosav, that you spoke about. So what happened here? The Rebbe spoke about this in a shul in Paris. And the Rebbe's Rishimis, many of the Rishimis that the Rebbe had, was preparing for something that he was going to speak. And indeed, in this Rishima it says, Mixas bebeis HaKnesses. What that means is the Rebbe did this a few times, you see, where the Rebbe prepared a lot, and then the Rebbe wrote after he spoke in shul, Mixas bebeis HaKnesses, or by the Chasanas, you see this too. I only spoke a little of this at the Chasan or in the shul. So this happened in Sukkot Tafrei Sadik Vav.
It doesn't have to be that he wrote it during Chol Hamoed.
Yeah, I don't know when the Rebbe wrote. Yeah, I don't know when the Rebbe wrote it.
Wrote it after Sukkot.
Don't know. Don't know when the Rebbe wrote it. Mixas v'beis haknesses. And then the Rebbe did is the Rebbe sent a message to his father about what he said, and so the Rebbe is responding to that. And you have and the Rebbe Levi Yitzchak is responding to that, and the Rebbe Levi Yitzchak goes a long Kabbalistic thing that is very hard to understand. Meaning he takes the same story that the Rebbe was dealing with. The Rebbe doesn't do it al pi Kabbalah. The Rebbe does it al pi Chassidus. The Rebbe's father, in response, says, "Let me show you al pi Kabbalah the same thing. Sfiris, a lot of Rosh Tevis. It's very hectic." Okay, so that's that. Now let's see what the Rishima actually says. So the Rebbe starts like this. I'm giving you the Rishimis without the Pianuchim, which means this is the way the Rebbe wrote it word for word. When they published the Rishimis, they gave you this, and then they also gave you an elucidated version, but we're going to stick with the non-elucidated version. Says the Rebbe like this: Meisei Midbar, the people who died in the Midbar, Lo yirasu lahashpal asma b'mitzvahs ma'atzis, Likutei Torah. The Rebbe would leave a blank with the idea that maybe one day he'll come back and put in the actual page number, which the Rebbe never did. What does it say in the Likutei Torah? We all know this because we learn all the six of the Rebbe about Parsha Shlach again and again and again, that there's a whole other deeper layer to the Meraglim story. It's not that they didn't want to go into Eretz Yisrael because they thought they're going to lose a war. They actually were not interested in the Avodas Hashem that comes about through living in Israel and plowing the field and doing all that. They didn't want to do mitzvahs ma'atzis. They wanted to do Torah, they wanted to do davening, they wanted to do faith, they wanted to do spirituality. Mitzvahs ma'atzis that you need to do Ma'atzah B'Poel, that was not their thing. And this is a chiddush the Alter Rebbe develops from Likutei Torah, and then the Rebbeim subsequent to that elaborated on that theme. And that is the big idea that the Rebbe is going to use to interpret this story on the fact that you're talking about spiritual giants. Okay? If you're talking about people who, they don't want to do mitzvahs ma'atzis because they want to engage in other stuff, they want to engage in other spirituality, we're talking about spiritual giants, and this secret, this message of that we're talking about spiritual giants, who made a mistake, but spiritual giants, that comes across in this Rabbah Bar Bar Chana's story. V'zeu meisei, meloshin musav mispar, mesei mispar, anashim. The Rebbe quotes from two different psukim, where meisei can mean the dead. But that very same word, men, Saf Yud, can mean people. You have V'hi Musav Mispar in Parshas Zeicha Bracha, and Misei Mispar in, what you say in davening, the Yotzcha Misei Mispar Kemat V'garim Ba. We don't mean dead there. What we mean is a few people. So somehow the word Misei in biblical Hebrew could mean people. So V'zeo Misei Midbar, people of the Midbar. What does that mean? V'lo Yishuv. People of the Midbar and not Yishuv. Yishuv means that I live a regular life, a physical life. A person of the Midbar means I don't live a physical life. I live a spiritual life, like the Avos. They live in the Midbar, detached from Olam Haza. So we're talking about Meisei Midbar, people of the Midbar, people who live a life that's separated from Gashmis. Ki gama Gashmis shalahem, because even their Gashmis wasn't so Gashmistic. Where do we see that? Two examples. Number one, Haman lo haya b'psoilas. Their food didn't have any waste to it, which really showed how it wasn't the type of food that we eat where there's always waste. The fact that there was food without any waste coming through their bodies really showed that their eating was a spiritual experience. And the Rebbe refers to Yuma with the extra space for the daf to perhaps fill in at a later point, where it says that the man didn't have sinless. And also there's the pasuk Simlascha Loivolsa, that the Jewish people's clothes miraculously didn't wear out, which also shows that even their food and even their clothing, it's not regular food and clothing. You're talking about people who are living a very detached existence, spiritual existence. And then the Rebbe continues, Kihayu Dor. You're talking about what we call that these are a generation of people with great knowledge. Va'alei Nemar, and about them it says, Isvuli Chasidoi. There's a pasuk in Tehillim that says, gather for me my dedicated ones, Kurs Evrisi Ale Zavach, those who went into a covenant with me, Ale Zavach, over a carbon. And that's a pasuk in Sanhedrin that one opinion says applies to the Meisei Midbar. So what the Chiddush here is, because Chiddush says that there are spiritual giants. We look at Nigla. Nigla, it looks like you're talking about people who didn't have faith, who didn't believe. So the Rebbe is showing you that, no, you see, even in the Gemara, that it takes this pasuk, Isuli Chasidei, calls them Chasidim, Karsei Vrisi Ale Zavach, the people went into a covenant with me on over a carbon, and it's referring to these people. Although there is a debate about this, we'll read the debate in a second, which means there's another view that says, no, they weren't there. This pasuk doesn't apply to the Meisei Midbar. HaKa'amar Toisus here says, the Isa Command Amar, that our story, the Rabbah Bar Chana story, follows the view of Yesh Lahem Chelik Lo'olam Haba. Okay, what's going on over here? So let's go to the Gemara in Sanhedrin and actually see what the Rebbe is referring to. The Gemara in Sanhedrin says as follows: Tanu Rabbana. We learned in a brisa. Dar ha-midbar ein lehem chelik lo elam haba. The people who passed away in the midbar, they are not coming back. They don't have chiyas hamesim. Shenemar, because the pasuk says, "Ba midbar azeh yitamu v'sham yamusu." In this midbar you will die out, and there you will die. It's a double language. Why do you have a double language? Yitamu, you will be wiped out by elam hazeh. V'sham yamusu, the second word is by elam haba. And so therefore, this is divrei Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is the one, by the way, in Sanhedrin, who's the great excluder when it comes to Tchias HaMesim. When it comes to Haseres HaShvatim, he also says they're not coming back. When it comes to Dara Midbar, he says they're not coming back. The Gemara says, Rabbi Akiva, what happened to you? You're the big lover of Jews, and all of a sudden you're excluding people from Tchias HaMesim. One of the Amoraim was quite surprised that Rabbi Akiva was doing this. Eliezer, on the other hand, who was known as a stricter person, he took the other view, both for the Haseres HaShvatim and for the Meisei Midbar. He says, Rabbi Eliezer, they are coming back. Shenemar, that pasuk, Isuli Chasidoi, gather for me my dedicated ones, those who went into a covenant with me on a carbon. And he darshans, who went into a covenant with Hashem on a carbon? It's the story at the end of Parshas Mishpatim, where the Yidden bring a carbon and they go into a bris with Hashem. And that's going on who? The Dar HaMidbar. And so therefore, Hashem is saying, Isuli Chasidai, Hashem is calling them Chasidai. So it must be, they're coming back for Tchias HaMesim. Okay. So you have this machlokas. Now, it says Tosfos, on our story, Tosfos says like this: V'damu v'kamanda mivsimi. Tosfos says it looked like they were drunk. Zok Tosfos mekan mashma. It is implied here, Kamanda Amar b'chelek, like the view that says in Parakhelek in Sanhedrin, that Meisei Midbar Yeshlem Chelek Le'elam Haba. It sounds here like Rabbi Eliezer. Now, what does Tosfos mean by that? It's a little vague. But I think he's looking at the story generally. We're talking about people whose bodies have been preserved hundreds of years later in a miraculous way. You're even able to see their faces and the complexion and the color on their face, and it looks like they're inebriated, they're intoxicated, their faces are upward. That doesn't make sense according to view that they're not coming back to Tchias HaMesim. That sounds like, if their bodies are preserved, it sounds like they are coming back. And so Tosfos says that this story is mashma, like the view that says they are coming back. So now let's go back to what the Rebbe is saying. The Rebbe is saying you're talking about spiritual giants. And you see it in Nigla, the fact that Isuli Chasidik, Curse of Risa, Alizavach, goes on them. There's a machlokes, yeah, but our sugya, you have to remember, our sugya negates Rabbi Akiva, our sugya follows Rabbi Eliezer, and so therefore we could totally see this story as referring to them as spiritual giants who are going to come back for Tchias HaMesim. Then the Rebbe says an amazing thing. What about the fact that there's another view? Or he's just going to completely negate the view of Rabbi Akiva? Rabbi Akiva said they're not coming back, which implies they're not good people. Remember, the Rebbe's whole foundation here is you're talking about great people. But Rabbi Akiva seems to be saying otherwise. Zok the Rebbe, invite her in the Rishima, number 8. Gam le'idach mando amar, even according to the other view that says they're not coming back, ule'ev shalomer, elam chelek lo'elam haba, doesn't mean literally they don't have a chelek lo'elam haba. The Rebbe says here, a moedik chiddush, sheim lamayla mechelek lo'elam haba. Elam chelek lo'elam haba means they're higher. That's a big chiddush, because remember, how does the Mishnah start? Every year has a chelek olam haba. Here are the people who don't have a chelek olam haba, and it lists a whole bunch of evil people. And then, in this conversation, you have Meisei Midbar, and what the Rebbe is saying is, elam chelek olam haba at least applies to here, but you can open the conversation about the other ones as well. I'm not saying what the answer is going to be, but at least for here, you can say, elam chelek olam haba means they're higher than olam haba. And so therefore, it's not a steer to the fact that I'm presenting here, these are great people. Rabbi Akiva would agree also. They're such high madrega, they're higher than Olam Haba. Now the truth is, this idea of Lamayla Mechelek Olam Haba was stated before. So in the Ha'aris of the Rishimis, when they put it out, they gave a few sources of earlier people. So one of the earlier, Megala Amukis, was a commentator of Nassim Nata Shapiro. I believe he wrote his commentary, I believe in the 1600s, but I don't remember. And he has an interesting pirush, al pi Kabbalah, if I recall correctly, ala Torah, and he says a similar idea. Look what he says. They don't need it. Why? Because they already had it. They saw God by Kriyas Yamsov v'amru, and they said, this is God, and we will make him beautiful, meaning we see him, we experience him. We need Olam Haba. Why do we need Olam Haba? Because we never had a face-to-face encounter with Hashem. They already had a face-to-face encounter with Hashem, so they don't need it, and so because they don't need it, they're higher from it. So this is also very similar to what the Rebbe's idea here is, showing that even Rabbi Akiva could be supporting this concept. Now, as a parenthesis...
What does Olam Haba mean if in this context?
Tchias HaMesim.
So they already had Tchias HaMesim?
So Megala Amukah says, that what Tchias HaMesim is that a soul in a body should have a face-to-face encounter with God. They already had it. So
then they don't need it.
They don't need it. Yeah, it does sound like the difference is that Megala Amukah does seem to be saying they're taka not going to have it, but not because they're bad, wicked, and undeserving. It's just because any advantage a Jew would have at Tchias HaMesim, they already accomplished that, and therefore they don't need it. So even that gets you to where the Rebbe wants you to go. The Rebbe Kiva is not downgrading them. It's not saying they're negative. It's just saying they're so high they don't need it. The Rebbe's point was a little different. Elam Chelek means that they're higher than it. Doesn't mean they're not going to have it. But that's a nuance different, and I don't want to get too far into that. I should say parenthetically that when the Rebbe did once talk about this in a Sikha, the Rebbe gave a different way of circumventing, so to speak, Rabbi Akiva. This has to go around. It doesn't go around.
He wants you. He's coming to the light.
Okay. Say Shema. 1, 2, 3. Ah. Oh.
Good night.
Okay. So.
Demonstrating Tchias HaMesim.
Okay. So the Rebbe says a different idea, a different interpretation, a different reinterpretation of what Rabbi Kiva is saying. The Rebbe, I'll just say it outside. The Rebbe quotes that there are two different chazals about how Tchias HaMesim works. One is that there's the etzem luz, there's a certain part of the body that's indestructible, and the body gets rebuilt from that. There's another chazal that speaks about Tchias HaMesim comes about when a person's body from a sarvod rokov. Sarvod rokov means a spoonful of waste, where the body pasha turns into nothing. And the Rebbe says these are two different ways of understanding Tchias HaMesim. Is Tchias HaMesim like you exist, we're just going to kind of rebuild you, but you're still here? Or is it like really a whole new beginning? And the Rebbe learns that maybe when Rabbi Kiva said certain people don't have a chelek le'olam haba, it's like regular Jews, etzem luz, and you build that up. And so in that sense, it's a continuation of their past existence. Others who elam chelek le'olam haba, they're coming back, but their body is going to go through a complete destruction before it is rebuilt. So the Rebbe learns that maybe that's what Rabbi Kiva means about them. Which again, what we gain by that is that all of a sudden we're not saying they're so evil they're not coming back to Tchias HaMesim. It's just that they have to go through an extra transition in order to get there. Either way,
and the other question: how come they were so complete with what you said?
Oh yeah, that would be a little bit of a yes. That would be a little bit of a problem, correct, in terms of the Sikha. Okay, so far what did we do? The Rebbe learns that the Rebbe didn't start, the main point is, Meisei Midbar, these are the dead of the Midbar, you're talking about ruchnistic people, great people, and according to all opinions, Rebbe Lezer, Rebbe Kiva, great spiritual giants. Okay, now let's continue reading the story, how the Rabba Bar Chana's story is interpreted based on this. Number 11, V'damu keman te'ifsemu. They look like they were intoxicated. Says the Rebbe, Al derech shtuya yayin nichnesu. This is similar to the concept of Nadav and Avihu, who went into the Mishkan when they were intoxicated, and it's also similar to the concept of Ben Azai hitzis v'ames, that Ben Azai peered into the Godhead and he died, which is a Gemara in Chagiga. What's the Rebbe doing here? This is something we're familiar with. There's how do you understand the Chet of Nadav and Avihu? And the Rebbe basically brings from Or Chaim that the Chet of Nadav and Avihu was not that they were in the wrong place, wrong time, not that they didn't bring the carbon that they weren't supposed to bring, and not even that they were drunk. The Chet of Nadav and Avihu was that they had, I shouldn't even say the Chet Nadav and Avihu. The story of Nadav and Avihu was that they had Chos HaNefesh. And wine is a metaphor for this idea of wanting more and more of God, where you get, so to speak, drunk by God, and so much so that as a natural result, their souls left their body. This is how the Rebbe interprets Nadav and Avihu many times, based on Or HaChaim. Ben Azai, he's one of the people who nichnas lapardis, he has some sort of spiritual vision, and he also has a chlois hanefesh, and that's how he passes away. Says the Rebbe, the Meisei Midbar, once you establish that they're spiritual giants, and once you establish that these were people who didn't want to live a physical life, they wanted to live a spiritual life, you could say the same thing. That these were people who looked like they were drunk. It's the same, we're invoking the idea of wine, we're invoking the idea of drunkenness to say these are people who went on a spiritual mission, a spiritual quest of chlois hanefesh. Now, interestingly, here too in the Haaretz, they bring that there was a commentator a very famous one on many of the Midrashim, who said a very similar thing. He was Reb Chanoch Zundel. He wrote the Sefer Anaf Yosef, and if you look at what he says, he also compares this story to Nadav and Avihu. He also says that the same thing applied to the Meisei Midbar, that you're talking about people who, just like with drunkenness, you took too much wine and therefore it had a negative result, so too with spirituality, you took too much spirituality, you took too much of God, so to speak, and as a result you end up having close hanefesh. So he actually gives a very similar interpretation. Let's continue in number 13. Then we say, V'ganu apirki. They were lying on their back. What is the symbolism of this? Says the Rebbe, Kol pnimiusam l'mayla. Their entire face, where were they oriented toward? Where were they looking at? What were they interested in? And their face, meaning their pnimius, not just bichitzenius, their whole being was oriented toward what? God. Okay? And the Anav Yosef also, in his interpretation of this, says the same thing. Kol inyanam klape mayla. Everything was heavenward. Umigmasan liras kved Hashem. They wanted to behold God. Achlu v'lo yispu minoyim elyon. They consumed, but were not sated by the pleasantness of Hashem. Okay. Now, the Rebbe continues with his interpretation, but in order to continue, we need to go and do a little bit of an introduction. The Gemara in Nida says as follows: Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Layet, he would curse Aman Degane Apirkid. He would curse those who would lay on their backs. And B'Pashtus, the reason for this is lying on the back for a male could invoke lewd thoughts, and so therefore Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi was against this type of behavior. So the Rebbe now, you have like a question. What's going on over here? That you have that they were lying on their back. Sounds like they went to sleep. They were in the same position that they went to sleep in. They went to sleep on their backs. That's what it sounds like. So how is that okay for people to go to sleep on their backs if that's not something that's appropriate? So the Rebbe says, Vine bebrachis and Nida, it's two different Gemaras. Megane, it disparages man de shachiv apirkid, a person who lies on his back. Varei heim hoyu shaichin kach mechayim. They were lying on their back when they were alive. Uchamuva poi b'toises dibra amaschil, as here, Toisus, and the Rebbe left blank to put in the Dibra Maschil, me Medrash Rabbah. Toisus brings the Medrash that we quoted earlier in text number 2, that they were here because they were lying that way from when they went to sleep. Toisus here has a discussion about whether you bury someone in tzitzis. There's custom to bury people in tachrichin and sometimes a talis. Should there be tzitzis there? So Toisus invokes this story and says, look, there was tzitzis on these dead people, and gets into a discussion of whether we should be doing this and shouldn't be doing this, and I understand that there's...
They were alive.
They were alive. So Toisus is discussing, that's part of the discussion. Some people think we should bury with tzitzis, some people think not, and this is a big Toisus on this subject. So what's going on over here? They're lying on their backs when they were alive, which is inappropriate. The reason you're not allowed to do it is because of the lewd thoughts. But we're talking about spiritual giants. If so, this is not shaykh to them. These are so separated from Haviyas and Lamazah, they're so separated from the ways of the world, that therefore the whole din doesn't apply to them. This whole thing of not lying on their back wouldn't have applied to them. Okay. The Rebbe continues with his interpretation and says, now we're going to say how great these people were. How great. Shegam b'yarche, even if we're talking about the yerech, the regal pchinas hatachton shem, their lower level, right? We spoke about the fact that they had the guy was going under their knee. So that represents their lowest level. Hava sekifa. Their lowest level is high up. The foot, the knee, is low down. Their lowest level is high up. Okay? That shows that even their lowest level was a very high level. Va'ad kama, how high? Shetaya, taya means a soicher, a business person. Einai ella moitzi mereshus l'shus aidei kesef ezav tchilu v'rechimu be'inyan knan. And then, which is ish Yisraeli ha'isik b'mitzvahs maitis. Okay, a little background. Chassidus teaches that Knan means a businessman. A business person. What does a business person do? A business person is different from someone who's, let's say, a farmer. Why? A farmer, he creates. He's actually contributing something. He takes a seed and he turns it into fruit, and he brings into the world something that didn't exist before. What's a business person do? Business person doesn't create anything new. What he does is he buys from here and he sells from there. The product is the exact same thing, but he takes it from the reshus of one person to the reshus of another person. That's what a soicher is. Knan I know it's a nation of Canaan, but Canaan also means a soicher. And so, what is this in Avodah? The Alter Rebbe in Lekutei Torah explains that this is Avodah of a Yid. Avodah of a Yid is that he takes something from the Rishus of Klippa and brings it into the Rishus of Kedusha. It stays the same thing, the same object. It's a phone. But till now it's in the Rishus of Klippa, whatever it is, and a Yid, through doing a mitzvah, brings it from the zone of Klippa into the zone of Kedusha. How? Through Ma'aseh Mitzvah. So that's not like a farmer. That's like a business person taking it from one domain to another domain. And how does a business person do his business? With money. What type of money? You have two types of money. Kesef and Zav. Chassidus explains Kesef and Zav. Kesef and Zav represent two different types of emotions that go along with Avodas Hashem. Kesef is Ava and Zav is Yira. And so, basically, the concept of a business person is he does Ma'aseh HaMitzvahs coupled with the emotions of Ava and Yira, and when he does that, he successfully takes from the zone of Klippa and brings it into the zone of Kedusha. So we're dealing here with a Taya. A Taya also means business person. So that represents the Jew. This Arab represents the Jew who is successfully doing mitzvahs ma'asiyos, which is what the Meraglim didn't want to do. The Taya represents the Jew who is doing mitzvahs ma'asiyos, and he's going under their leg, which is their lowest level. Which means these guys are on such a high level that their lowest level is higher than this guy who's successfully doing Ma'aseh mitzvahs. They are in a higher madrega than him, which is the meaning of him as the Taya, as the Knani, as the Soicher. He's doing mitzvahs, he's going under them. Then the Rebbe goes further, and the Rebbe says that he goes through on a camel. He's going on a camel under them, and the Rebbe finds a significance in the camel. So here, this is a little. I guess we'll see for ourselves. But the Rebbe quotes as follows. The Gemara says like this: Rabbi Acha says, "Gamal ha'oicher bein agmalim." When you have a gamal that is copulating with other camels, v'dimsa gamal harug b'tzidoi, and you find another camel that is dead nearby, b'yadua shezeh hargei, then you know that the male who was busy doing the pru uruvu is the one who's the killer. You could assume that animals, when they mate, they sometimes get violent, and so if there's an animal that's dead there, you can know that the male is the one who killed that other animal. They were probably fighting over the female. Now notice how the lashon of the Gemara is ha'oicher bein agmalim. So what is this terminology of ha'oicher bein agmalim? So Rashbam right away tells us gamal ha'oicher. Oicher means asuk betashmush revia. He's doing the act of copulation. Why is it called the word ha'oicher? Because the Gemara in Bechorah says l'gabei tashmush gamal about the copulation of a camel, that is achar keneged achar, that it is done where the two animals are facing back to back with each other. The stam behemoths v'shash tashmish mishtagos, they go crazy. Umakin schorim zeh when they are in heat, the males are hitting each other. Kach shamaytemer abenu ziknai menuchase kaved. Remember, Rashi is the Rashbam Zedi, so he is quoting here from his Zeda Rashi that this is what Rashi told him. So. What was that? They didn't have National Geographic. So the Ben Yehoyada in number 19 says something very interesting about that. He says, Tana Gamal Achar Keneged Achar, Hine Payirenu Baghdad, Yogin Aleh Alekim, here in our city Baghdad, right? The Ben Ish Chai, who passed away in like 1902 or 1903, he was the Rav in Baghdad for many years, and he wrote a commentary on the Gemara, on the Agadah called Ben Yehoyada, and he writes that here in Baghdad, in all these Arab lands, we have a lot of camels here in Arabia, and I asked how their behavior, what their behavior is, and I was told I learned that the way they do their pru revu is not back to back. It's where the panim neged ochar, where okay, you get it. Now, so he's dealing with the question. So he writes, maybe it's nishtanu ativim. Maybe the nature has changed because the Gemara is describing a reality that we no longer see today. And he gives an example because the Gemara in Soita says that when a female comes out of the mother and a male comes out of the mother, they come out differently. The female comes out nekeva panel lamayla, facing upwards, and the zachar, the face is downward. Now the Ben Ish Chai says that I asked around, and that's not the way babies are born today. So we must say that it was Nishana Ativim. By the way, the Gemara in Soita is saying that Parai told Shifra and Pua that before the baby is born, they should be able to tell whether it's a male or a female using this method, and then kill it before it comes out, and so the mother wouldn't know. The mother would just say, "Oh, the baby died in childbirth," and the Gemara says that this is the siman. So he's like, "Well, obviously it's nishtanu ativim because it's not happening." So he thinks that maybe the same thing is with the camel. Okay. Either way, what you see is that there's a certain description here about how the camels are bring the next generation of camels into being, and that's going to be important for the story, as we'll see momentarily. But before we get there, there's one more reference to this, where this, as we're going to see now, is considered quite sneistic for camels. Why is this quite sneistic, or where do we see that it's sneistic? This is in the story of Yaakov and Esav. When Yaakov sends all these animals to Esav, the Torah lists Izim and Tyashim, Rechelim and Elim, but then so that's male and female. Izim, Tyashim, Rechelim, Elim. Skip camels for a second. Paros, Parim, Asainos, Ayarim. So each one, you have the male and the female of the animal, except for Gemalim, Nikos, Uvneam, Shloshim. You have female nursing camels and 30 children. So there is no mention of males here. And so Rashi brings a Medrash Haggadah that maybe there is a reference to males here, because Ubnehem is not their children, but Banoehem, the builders. Who are the builders? Well, the builders are the males. So maybe Uvnehem doesn't mean the children, and maybe it means the builders. The builders are the males, and so there's a hint here to the males. Why is it not say clearly male camels? Why is it only a remez? The fact that their faces are in opposite directions, that shows on a high level of tznius that camels have, and therefore in the Torah you end up having not a reference to the males in an overt way, because so tzniistic, so we're going to even hide the fact that there are males here. Usually tznius means hide the females, here tznius means hide the males. Okay, so now the Rebbe builds into this. Remember, we're talking about these spiritual ruchniistic bale madrega lying on the floor. Their foot, their lowest madrega is so high that even the yid who's doing Maisa HaMitzvahs, who's involved in Maisa HaMitzvahs together with Ava and Yira, who's represented by the Taya, is going under them on a camel. You're not just talking about a Jew who does mitzvahs with Ava and Yira. You're talking about a Jew on a very high level. Even his animal, which is the guf and the nefesh habahamis, is a gamal, is a camel. Camel represents a edel and nefesh habahamis. Why? Because Sanua Betashmish. And here the Rebbe brings the two Maimara Chazal, Ha'oicher Bein Agmalim, that was the first one we saw, Uvneim Uvanoeim, that is the second one that we saw, Ashal Achar Chet Sadas, Yeshal Agam B'loi Taiva, although after Chet Sadas it's impossible to be engaged in the act without any selfishness. Aval Begain, you're talking about someone who basically reached that level. You're talking about a yid who basically reached a level where even in this area of sexuality, he doesn't even have any personal drive here. So you're talking about a yid on a very, very high madreg. Then the Rebbe goes further. This piece, I don't know if I fully understood it, but we'll try our best. Another symbolism about the fact that he's riding on a camel. The Gemara in Bracha says, Haraya gamal b'chaloim, if you see a camel in a dream, so then it means something. What does it mean? Misa niknas aloi min hashamayim, it means you were supposed to die. V'isilu mimena, but you were saved from this decree. Okay, so this is part of a long sugya in brachas that gives meanings and interpretations for many dreams. It's a sugya that I would like to learn one day and understand, but I'm not there yet. Now, the Rebbe is going to pick up on this. The Gemara says, if you see a camel in a dream, so now let's interpret. What does the dream mean? The dream is, Hayinu kecholmin, a time when we're like dreamers, which is when? Zman HaGolus. So we're talking about someone who is living through Galus, and Misa Niknasa Allah min Hashamayim. If you see a Gamal in the Chaloim, then Misa Niknasa Allah min Hashamayim v'tzilu mimena. What does that mean? Pirush ayidei his beinenus bala rasui. We're talking about a roya. The way I understand what the Rebbe is saying over here, roya means you're seeing. Seeing, what type of seeing over there? A seeing of meditation. That you did such deep meditation, ayidei his beinenus, and therefore your roya in a chaloim, even though it's a time of darkness, it's a time of galus, even though it's a chaloim, you're still mitzbaynin and alikus and you're roya. And as a result, you had ratzui, which is ras libcha in a way of klais hanefesh. So that's the meaning. Misa niknas alay min hashamayim. You're supposed to die. In other words, you're mamish holding by klais hanefesh. You're his beininus is leading you to Klois HaNefesh. Al derech ben kuf kilu meis v'avar. Or it's similar to the idea of someone who did so much of it. The Mishnah says that when you reach 100, it's like you're dead. So it's a very not nice thing to say about people. Chassidus teaches that it means that you did so much avodah that you're a hecher from Welt and ganzen hecher from kilu meis v'avar batam in oilam. You're l'mayla mea oilam. So Rebbe is saying that's what's happening here. You have someone who, despite living in a chaloim, despite living in galus, is a roya. He's having his boinurus, and as a result, it's Misa niknas alei min hashmayim. Either he's hecher from Welt, it's as if he died, or he's about to have Klois HaNefesh. Aval hasilu mimena, but God said, I want you back here in this world, and which is ba'kor atachai, which you still need to be down here in the world. So here's a second point where the Rebbe taps into the symbolism of the Gamal and says that this is really showing how high of a level the Jew is, not the Meisei Midbar, how high of a level the Jew is. Veloyoid, moreover, Shaskifa Rumcha, he has an erect spear. What is that? The Rebbe says Krishma. That represents Krishma. What's the source? Zoyar. And we're not talking about Krishma, we're talking about Mesiras Nefesh to Krishma. So now look what happened over here. We took a Jew. The Jew is doing Torah mitzvahs, number 1. He's doing Ava and Yira, number 2. Number 3, Oiske Edel Tes Nefesh Abahamis. Okay? Number 4, he's even having his Boinunus and Ratzui and all that stuff. And number 5, he's coming along with a strong Krishma, which is Mesiras Nefesh, Ma'is Hashem and Kadam Shem Echad. And our Chassidus teaches what type of Madrega this is. And despite all these heights, Loi Naga Afaf Chinas Regal the Meisei Midbar. He still is going under the leg of the Meisei Midbar. That shows you how high of a level the Meisei Midbar are talking about. Here's the Zohar the Rebbe is referring to. The Zohar says Rumcha is Ramach. The Roimach is made up of those letters. So Ramach is the Krishma because there are 248 words in Krishma, and then you need a Vav for the Roimach. In Hebrew, you drop the Aleph, so the Aleph's not important. But you do need to understand what the Vav is representing. So it says, Imshis Tevin the Yehuda, with the 6 words of Yehuda, of Achtos, which means Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. That gives you Ramach plus Vav Ha Roimach. So that's why Krishma represents the Roimach. Okay, so till now, this whole story is telling you the Maila of who? Of the Meisei Midbar. Okay, so really, if you just pause here, this is a theme that you see many times in Chassidus, where we look at the stories in the Tanakh and the mistakes that they made, and there's a tendency to almost understand, they were on such a low level, and Chassidus time and again shows no very, very high level, and so far that's what this story is all about. Look how high of a level those guys, they're much better than you. You're only able to go under them. They made a mistake, but that's on their business with God. It was a spiritual mistake. They're on a much higher level. But now the Rebbe is going to shift and he's going to say that the continuation of this story of Rabbi Baruch Hana is actually now going to show us the Maila of the Taya. It's going to show us the Maila of this Arab merchant who's going under him, meaning it's going to show the Maila of us and our Avodas Hashem over them. Continue in 26. The Im calls them, despite the greatness of the Meisei Midbar, Mesaper, Mailas, Haseder, the Taya, it tells you the greatness of the avodah of the Jew, Hanichnasim Eretz Yisrael, who goes into Eretz Yisrael, which is Eretz Canaan. Eretz Canaan, and here the Rebbe is calling it Eretz Canaan, because it's the land where we do the avodah of Canaan. Ma'isa Mitzvah is taking things from the world of Klippa and bringing it into the world of Kedusha. Where do we see this Maila of a Yid and our avodah, and the avodah of Ma'isa Mitzvah, the Rabbi Baruch Hana, not Al Karna, the Tchalta. That Rabbi Baruch Hana took a corner of the Tchelis. We interpreted before, it took the corner of Tzitzis. In the corner of the Tzitzis, there was white and there is blue. But it uses dafka the word Tchelis. Why does it use dafka the word Tchelis? The Nekuda was the Tzitzis. The Frat, if he's looking for 3 or 4, there's not negea the Tchelis. The 3 or 4 is not negea the Tchelis. Why does it use Tchelis? So the Rebbe teaches like this. Pirush b'chazirusa l'avodas hashuv. When Rabbi Baruch Hana is going back to avodas hashuv, here the Rebbe actually clarifies something that wasn't clear in the Rishim until now. This whole story that we're saying over here, Rabbi Baruch Hana himself is going on this type of journey. Rabbi Baruch Hana, by going to the Meisei Midbar, means he's adopting their mindset. It means he's adopting their way of life. He's, for a few moments at least, becoming a person of the Midbar, separated from Gashmi, is going on a spiritual journey to have Klois HaNefesh. Rabbi Baruch Hana himself is doing that. And now he's going back. Going back is like, okay, that was a nice Ratzui, and now I'd like to have a Shuv. He took a little of their tchelas. What tchelas mean? Tchelas could be a color, but tchelas could also mean vayuchulu, to wipe out, to eliminate. And tichla can mean to destroy, and when the Zohar talks about tchelas, it says the words, the ochla v'shati, it consumes and destroys hagashmias. So tchelas is a mindset of no gashmias, no velt, only spirituality. Rabbi Bar Chana is like, I'm going back to gashmias elam hazeh. Well, I'm going to take a little bit of their mindset. I'm going to take a little bit of this mindset of spirituality negating a physical way of life. Yeah, I'm going back to shuv, but let's say I'm going to a little of that I'm going to take. Avalaz, but with that, he couldn't go out of the midbar. If you have that mentality, of the primacy of spirituality and klois hanefesh, then you are not able to enter the physical world. That's why he's not able to move. That's why now he's in an ambulance. He can't get anywhere, because of the fact that he has that mentality of I took their tchelas, I took the wiping out of gashmias. He can't move. The Rebbe adds, perhaps you can say that this is similar to the Rashbi of Rebbe Lazar. The Gemara in Shabbos says that wherever they looked, they were destroying. What does that mean, wherever they looked that they were destroying? They were basically saying that you can't have a Gashmistic type of life. So they had to go back to the cave. So just like Hashem was saying, hey, if you have that anti-Olam Hazeh mentality, you cannot be here. Go back to your cave. So too, Rabbi Bar Chana, if you're taking the tcheles and you have this anti-Olam Hazeh mentality, you can't move. You have to stay here in the midbar. You can't go back to the yishuv. Now, for the next point, the Rebbe points to the Rashbam. The Rashbam, on the Dibra Amasav Eloi Hava Mestagelon, we weren't able to move. The Rashbam says, the animals that we were riding couldn't go. Now, if you look at it, really, Rashbam didn't have to say it. Why did Rashbam? Rashbam could have said, I couldn't walk. Why did Rashbam say the animals that we were on couldn't move? So the Rebbe is going to interpret that in the continuation of the story. So now the Arab merchant tells him, he is the one who knows. What does he represent? He represents Ma'is HaMitzvahs. He represents not the Meisei Midbar. So he knows the truth. And he tells Rabbi Bar Chana, Gemiri, we have a Kabbalah, a tradition. It's not understood. In other words, logic dictates that a higher level is separated from Olam Hazeh. How do you know that the ultimate of what God wants is not that, but Olam Hazeh? You only know that because of Kabbalah, because of the fact that this is what Hashem said. But if you're going to follow logic, any person who came up with their own system of spirituality, it always was separate yourself from Olam Hazeh. That's Al Pi Seichel. So what is our tradition? If you take anything from them, meaning if you adopt their mentality, you're not able to move. Upirish Rashi, interesting that Rebbe calls it Rashi, so Rashbam, the animals that we were riding couldn't move. What does this mean? You cannot be a true grower, a true spiritual traveler. It is dafka through Kiyam Mitzvahs Maisis that you could become a mover, someone who actually grows. And that's dafka Aidei Haguf and Nefesh HaBahamis, which is the deal. Rashbam is calling out that the animals couldn't move, because really this is a story all about the animal, that the only way you could move is through the animal, meaning through doing the avodah of mitzvahs on the animal, the Nefesh HaBahamis. Why is it that you can't move? L'chaira, a spiritual seeker can't grow. A spiritual meditator can't grow. The Avos weren't able to grow. What do we mean? An angel can't grow. What do we mean that you can only move, you can only be a mahalech through the avodah of the guf nefesh and mitzvahs? Says the Rebbe, ki mahalech, what does it mean to be a grower? Latzis me'agvul v'seder shtalshlus. If you want true growth, it means to get out of the system. And kol zman shehu b'seder shtalshlus, because so long that you're in the system that we call Seder Shtalshlus, you're in the same ballpark. Yeah, you achieved growth. But today you're in Chesed, then you went up another level, you went up another level. It's all relative to where you were before. You're all in the same ballpark. So that's not real called growth. Or another way of saying it is when you reach level 4, you can still see level 3, you can still see level 2, you can still see level 1, which means you're still connected to those levels, which means you didn't really surpass them yet. When, however, you do Ma'is HaMitzvahs, when you work on the Guf and the Nefesh HaBahamis, so then what happens? then you're tapping into Hecher and say there's Shalshos. Oh, that's growth. That's the real growth that could be achieved. And so this is the symbolism of the immobility that he had at this point. And so therefore, whereas the beginning of the Rishima is really building up how great these people were, and you are on a lower level than them, but at the same time, you could be on a lower level, but if you want to be a Mahalach, or another way of saying it, and do God's Kavanah, yeah, I'm on a lower level, but I'm going to be a Mahalach and do God's Kavanah, and that's Dafka through the not the Meisei Midbar's mentality, it's Dafka through the mentality of Ma'aseh Mitzvahs. So personally, now the Rishima continues, and he actually goes to explain the tzitzis thing, the 3 and the 4, but I thought this would be enough, and definitely in terms of time, that is the case. So what I found very interesting about this is that it's very consistent with what the Rebbe says in the later years with the Sichos. The messaging of Parsha Shlach in the Sichos is very much along these lines, but not giving us this interpretation in terms of this in this Gemara. For whatever reason, the Rebbe didn't give it to us. And I'd say that when the Rebbe interpreted the Kom Rab of the Shachtel Rab Zera Agadata, another wild Gemara, and the Rebbe also interpreted that according to Chassidus, and by the way, connected a little to this. Klois HaNefesh, that whole thing. The Rebbe said that he's saying he could have said it at the Purim Fabringen. He chose not to because he didn't want it to be broadcast around the world. And he's asking that when Sichos in English produced this Sicha, because it was Tosh Mem Daled Shmini, I think, Shmini Mem Daled, it was Shabbos. When Sichos in English does the Fabringen, they should not translate it. So you see, I don't know if you want to connect this, but a certain hesitancy of taking a Gemara and just introducing a wild interpretation to a wild Gemara. The Rebbe seemed to be hesitant about, well, the Rebbe did it, although he waited many, many years, Tashmam Daled. I'd assume that the Rebbe had this interpretation from the beginning. Okay, it's a good question, I don't know, but the Rebbe said not to do it. I'm wondering if there's a connection here, that although the ideas you have here, the Rebbe said throughout the years, but in terms of putting it into the interpretation of this Gemara, the Rebbe never did. Again, it's all speculation. But in summary, the basic theme here, the fancy word is motif, is something that repeats itself again and again and again. That is, you're on a lower level than them. These guys are really spiritual greats. But on the other hand, in terms of fulfilling the kavanah and in terms of our achievements, we're able to achieve more dafka through this. So we live in a world where most of us don't have this challenge. In other words, most of us aren't predisposed to crave for spirituality at the expense of Yishuv. We're all very happy in Yishuv. But the lesson that we need to take from this is that, and the Rebbe did say this on other occasions, that you need to have that other side you need to have. That spirituality is meaningful and I want to have a relationship with Hashem and it should be a real thing. But then, not to get lost with that and to then always bring it down to direct how we live our lives in a Gashmistic way. Chaim.
It doesn't say what this is, it's like